As you look out over the deep green hills and you see the towers and the turrets sticking out on the hillsides, you get this rather foreboding sensation, like you're in this gothic storybook.
Prague and Copenhagen are two of Europe's most magical, colorful, and fairy tale reminiscent cities. As the capitals of Czechia and Denmark, respectively, both cities are densely packed with distinctive cultures, architecture, and cityscapes. Now, here on A Sense of Travel, my goal is to capture all 5 senses of as many cities, countries, and natural landmarks around the world as I possibly can, so that I can accurately immerse you into the physical experience of those places through the screen. That said, today I'm diving into more than just the things you can experience through photography or bullet lists. How do Prague and Copenhagen stack up in the way that they smell, the way the air feels, the ambience, and the lore that creates the magic of the atmospheres, the sounds that fill your ears in the city streets, and, of course, the tastes that define each experience? Well, find out today in the latest installment of my Comparing the Senses series, Prague versus Copenhagen. After the video, be sure to comment on which of these 2 cities you find has an experience that fits your persona more. I'm Michael, and this is A Sense of Travel. Let's dive in. So, before we dive into the senses, let's take a look at some very quick facts about each city in case you aren't familiar with either one. Prague is the capital of Czechia, and it's home to nearly 1.4 million people in its city limits, and nearly 2.3 million in its metro area. Copenhagen is about the same size in terms of its metro area population, but it has a smaller population within its city limits at around 600,000. Prague sits snugly in the heart of Central Europe in the rolling green hills of Czechia's Bohemia region. Northwest of Prague, at the gateway to Scandinavia in Denmark, sits Copenhagen. So the first thing to look at when stacking up Prague and Copenhagen is perhaps the most obvious thing: their cityscapes. We'll kick off in Prague. Prague has one of the largest, best-preserved collections of medieval streets and buildings in the world, and it's obvious from the start. Stone towers and turrets pop out from above the blanket of red clay terracotta roofs jumbled together like a maze. Prague from above is like a Where's Waldo puzzle. And seriously, the blanket of terracotta, low-rise buildings densely packed together into a maze of creamy, warm facades is dotted with spiring steeples and towers and interwoven into densely covered hills of green. The deep brown Vltava River flows beneath the medieval stone bridges wrapping around the majestic and fairytale-like metropolis. To add to the depth, there is nothing flat about the roofline. This is a dense, multi-layered view of a city that, if you discount the whimsical-looking skyscrapers in the distance and the occasional crane, looks as if it hasn't changed in centuries. From the ground, you get the sense that you're surrounded by medieval royalty. From the statue-adorned stone Charles Bridge crossing the Vltava River, the magnificent Prague Castle towers above you on the hilltop, and the warm-colored terracotta-topped Malestrana district greets you like a royal main street behind stone, arched gates. Of course, the cityscape isn't all medieval. As I mentioned, a modern business district of skyscrapers pops out in the distance, and shinier, modern landmarks like the Dancing House brings a 21st century layer to the artistic, bohemian storybook of a city. While you might not see as many towers and turrets in the skyline, Copenhagen has actually been nicknamed the City of Spires. The horizon, no matter what direction you turn, is defined by majestic and, in some cases, eclectic spires, steeples, domes, and towers. Copenhagen is a spectacular sea of clay terracotta roofs, aged, green bronze domes and spires, warm-colored facades and low-rise buildings, gaping canals, and lush, green trees. Warm facades of rustic oranges, golds, reds, and browns, joined by warm brick and stone, make up the color palette of Copenhagen, and there's a definitive sense of where you are on the planet.
I've been to a lot of European capitals, but this is definitely the warmest, not literally speaking, the air is freezing, but the warmest looking place I've been yet. The homes, the shops, everything is like a golden, rustic, yellow, orange, red, you've got cobbled streets. It's a little ruined by the cars, but that's the 21st century for you. Beautiful clay terracotta roofs, planters hanging on the windows, vines. It's gorgeous, and it's remarkably quiet, which I love.
Things like majestic swans in the waterways, gold-plated flagpoles, spires poking out of the horizontal skyline, cobbles integrated into nearly every sidewalk, occasional horse-drawn carriages, and wide, magnificent boulevards preserve an ambience of an old fairy tale set in the world of Danish royalty here in Copenhagen. Something you really can't miss when talking about Copenhagen's cityscape is the beaches. Each evening in Copenhagen, I walked or took the metro to Amager Beach, a barrier island facing the saltwater strait between Denmark and Sweden. It's a relaxing, peaceful, beachy setting that really sets Copenhagen apart from Prague's inland hills. If you've ever been to Disney World, then you know the sensation I'm about to describe. Stepping into Old Town Prague is like walking into the Magic Kingdom, albeit a far denser version. Large cobblestones blanket the winding, bright medieval streets lined with 4 to 5 story buildings of old European Baroque, Gothic, and Art Nouveau architecture, each adorned with decorative windowsills, lanterns, wooden doors, and rickety signs. Facades in colors of mustard yellows, beige, cream, olive green, pastel pink, golden tan, and white, mixed with beige and gray stone, greet you on the ground with aged bronze and bright clay terracotta roofs towering above. Below the Praguers living in flats above the streets are shops that range from souvenirs to jewelers to restaurants to mini-markets. Breaking up the dense streets are large blocks dominated by beautiful churches that wind in seamlessly. Occasionally, squares that squeeze into the slithering streetscape bear dining terraces and cafe seats. Most of the sidewalks are cobbled in contrasting shapes and patterns, which reminded me a bit of Lisbon, Portugal. Quite often, you'll find little passageways between streets that run through building courtyards, usually accompanied by even more shops and restaurants. While not quite as medieval, the old heart of Copenhagen and city center, Andreby, is still both majestic and magical, both modern and ancient, and both densely packed and covered in lush green parks. Colorful, warm building facades of plaster painted in golden yellows, deep blues, rustic oranges, whites, and reds, alongside medieval buildings of stone and brick, blanket the city with red clay terracotta roofs topping it. At the ground level and alongside the cars carefully cruising down the streets are hundreds of cyclists on their way to work. Cycling is one of the most popular means of commuting in Copenhagen thanks to the city's topography. It is ridiculously flat.
If somebody told me right now that I was at the highest natural point in Copenhagen, I would probably believe them.
Perhaps the most photographed part of the Andreby is the beautifully colored row of merchants' houses along the canal front, Nyhavn. The waterfront strip here is absolutely gorgeous and just as colorful as it seems in the pictures. The houses, some very narrow and others quite wide, range from rustic golds and reds to pastel pinks and blues, shades of white and deep blues, and ranges of light and dark brown brick. The houses and shops range from between 4 and 5 stories tall, with attic windows protruding out of the terracotta roofs. Cobblestone streets line the deep, green canal, which is lined with a series of both modern and older sailboats, most of which boast the Danish flag. Now, the city's overall color palettes are both remarkably warm regarding the overall cityscape, as indicated here. When you see a video or a picture of a place and you try to imagine what it must feel like to actually be there, an important component of that is the way the air smells. Let's see how Prague and Copenhagen stack up. Prague is a sweet-smelling city. Throughout the cobbled and colorful maze of streets, you'll catch wafts of sweet perfumes from the shops and from the Praguers themselves, sweet pastries from the dozens of bakeries, old, musty stone and wood from the patchwork of medieval buildings and cobbles, and a bit of cigarette smoke. Depending on the time of day, fresh coffee joins that already sweet and weathered scentscape. Prague's air isn't super humid, so the natural setting doesn't really waft into the heart of the city streets as much as you might think. But as you get close to the edge of the Vltava River or the oasis of Petrin Hill, fresh river water and flowering bushes replace those city scents in your nostrils. A Prague-scented candle, if I were to make one, would blend the notes of sweet pastries, damp stone, fresh water, smoke, vanilla musk, and coffee. In Copenhagen, that inland earthy air transforms into a nautical scentscape. Salt water from the sea, aging wood from old timber houses and wooden boats, and fresh grass fill the cool air in Copenhagen. Copenhagen's scentscape has a lot in common with Prague's thanks to the smell of sweet Danish pastries from the countless bakeries in the city. Thanks to those long sandy beaches, the scent of beachy sand joins in with the scent of salt water. If I were to create a Copenhagen candle, it would smell of salt water, pastry bread, aged wood, and old brick. Prague and Copenhagen represent two very distinctive cuisines on the European continent, and, in my opinion, both are mouthwatering. In the interest of no bias here, I won't share my preference, but I will say that one of these cities is far more affordable than the other. In fact, in Prague, you can find beer even cheaper than water. Let's take a look at some of the tastes that capture the essence of each city. We'll start in Prague, where there are too many hearty, warm, heavy culinary staples to count. Here are a few that I feel like capture the essence of the city nonetheless. Goulash. Goulash is probably the Czech food you're most familiar with. Absolutely hearty, heavy, and delicious, the richly dark beer-sauced beef goulash comes alongside Bohemian dumplings, which are like little bread slices and are perfect for soaking up that leftover sauce. I tried this Czech classic in the Old Town at Kozlana a Propros restaurant. Smazany syr. My good friend Mary Ellen, who once lived in Prague, pointed me in the best direction possible, towards Smazany syr. A charming old restaurant at the top of the hillside above Malestrana served up Smazany syr, and my goodness, it's heavenly. Basically, these are big fried cheese squares, like mozzarella sticks, but far larger and, of course, squares. Served alongside golden potatoes and tartar sauce, this meal is a cheese lover's paradise. Palechinki. Considered a dessert, but eaten for breakfast by me, Czech sweet crepes are thin, pancake-like crepes that cover a humongous plate. I cannot overstate how surprised I was by their size. Mine, from Café Crêperie Pod Vessi in the lesser town, or Malestrana, was filled with cooked cinnamon apple, caramel, raisins, and topped with a mint leaf. It was the perfect balance of sweet and minty, and with a strong coffee to accompany it, was an unbeatable cozy rainy day brunch. As Denmark's capital city, Copenhagen is filled to the brim with delicious Danish cuisine, and I really wish I could have tried it all, but alas, Copenhagen is incredibly expensive to dine in. Here are a few of those city-defining dishes. Kanelsnegl. Every person I asked in Copenhagen's cafes, what would you say is the most typical dish for Denmark, pointed me towards these Danish cinnamon rolls, or as the literal translation goes, cinnamon snails. I'm not going to argue with the locals, they know best, and they were correct. Danish cinnamon rolls, fresh from the bakery, are delicious, sticky, and sweet. I cannot recommend them enough. Road Pilsner.
You may not associate Denmark with hot dogs, but the Danes love their red sausages, and so that's what they use on the hot dog stands throughout the city. I've been told it's a must-try in Copenhagen, so here we are.
Hot dogs aren't just a staple in New York City or Germany. The Danes love their red sausages. Red on the outside and white on the inside, the sausages have a rather pungent but good taste, and when placed on a hot dog bun, are paired with onions, fried onions, and a sauce that reminds me of ketchup and barbecue. Smørrebrød open sandwiches. Expensive but delicious and worth it, smørrebrød is a Scandinavian staple and a Danish favorite. This open-faced brown bread sandwich can be covered in multiple things. In my case, I tried one with marinated herring with capers and apple, one with chicken salad, mushrooms, and bacon, and one with potatoes and caramelized cheese. There's no real winner in the realm of cuisine, as both Czechia and Denmark's cuisines are quite distinctive, and it really does come down to your own personal taste buds. This is also not even close to a comprehensive list of the defining tastes of each city. Prague, especially in the warmer months, is a city whose soundscape bursts with art and life. The sounds of crowds of people chattering and trotting through the patterned cobblestones fill your ears, and they aren't the only ones trotting. Horses and carriages trot alongside as well. The medieval cityscape is filled with the sounds of screeching trams and cars rumbling along on the cobblestones. Each hour, church bells from the seemingly infinite spires and towers echo through the urban stone canyons. There are a lot of bats in Prague, and as such, you'll hear bats crying up in the rooftops, particularly at dusk.
Did you know Prague was known for their jazz clubs? Me either.
Staying true to its artistic, bohemian character, you can't talk about Prague without mentioning its famous jazz music. Jazz smoothly and warmly fills the city's dozens of hidden clubs. Copenhagen is a remarkably quiet city outside of the heavily touristed portions, that is to say. And if you're anywhere near the Little Mermaid statue or Tivoli Gardens, it's going to sound like crowds at a festival. As you imagine yourself in the light, pleasant city squares, however, the sounds that fill your ears include light pedestrian chatter, the cry of seabirds, the clanging of street dining cutlery, and occasionally street music. On the hour, you'll hear church bells echoing out into the city. The sound of cars is rare here thanks to Copenhagen's high walkability, its rather famous bike network, and modern public transportation system, although occasionally work vans will clatter along those cobbled stones. Despite being located quite inland, Prague has an oceanic climate, which means warm, comfortable summers and cold, snowy winters, and not a ton of humidity. Prague's moderate temperatures and relatively dry air make for a generally pleasant feeling. Even on dark, gloomy, rainy days, the city feels alive and rather mystical. Copenhagen is a good bit further north than Prague and can feel a bit brisk and chilly comparatively, especially thanks to the winds coming off the sea and rolling right over the incredibly flat landscape. However, Copenhagen can also be quite pleasantly warm, and when it is, the city feels like a big outdoor lounge where Danes and tourists alike soak up the sun. So what do I mean when I talk about the comparison of the ambience and the lore of each city? Well, for starters, I'm a strong proponent of the idea that to really capture the spirit and the magic of places around the world, you have to let your imagination roam a bit wild. After all, it's the urban legends and mythological fairy tales and dramatized history that play such a big part of the identity of cities and countries worldwide. Letting that fantasy and the folklore infiltrate your mind as you wander about can really bring out the mystique and the charm of different places. Experiencing Prague is like experiencing a magical, medieval storybook in real life. Yes, it's a modern, 21st century city, but when you look past the phones, the screens, and the modern outfits, you're whisked away into a world that feels like pure magic. The infinite sea of spires, fairy tale stone towers, turrets, medieval signs, and mystical castles create a sense of pure magical fantasy. I know Harry Potter is set in the United Kingdom, but if I didn't know any better, I would fully believe that Prague was a world in which witches and wizards were tucked away, where every alleyway and street could be Diagon Alley or Hogsmeade. There's a mystical, magical, medieval feeling in the old castles, the mythical astrological clock and its rather morbid lore, the grungy underground jazz clubs, and the beatnik, artistic, stereotypically bohemian neighborhoods, and it can be hard to remember that you're not actually living in a medieval magical fantasy. In contrast, Copenhagen, while certainly feeling like a fairy tale, doesn't feel like one that takes place in as much of a medieval setting. Instead, Copenhagen feels like an elegant, royal fairy tale straight out of a Hans Christian Andersen storybook. Horses trotting on cobbled stones, royal palaces like Christianberg, golden-laced spires, statues like the Little Mermaid, colorful merchants' homes, magical theme parks, and old stone castles like Rosenborg create a sense in Copenhagen that you're living in a Disney cartoon, but with a proper sense of elegance and sophistication. Copenhagen, even in those brick-laced neighborhoods away from the Indre By, has just enough grit and wear to feel like a lived-in city, but enough of a twinkle to feel like the setting of a true fairy tale kingdom. The idea here isn't to pit cities up against each other. In fact, the idea is to celebrate the fact that there's so much world to discover and to experience and explore. Thanks for diving into the magical European capitals of Prague and Copenhagen with me today, and stay tuned for more city comparisons in the near future. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.